Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Keep It Fictional, a book podcast from the Port Moody Public Library. I'm your host today, Emma, and I'm joined by book friends Virginia, Corrine, and Sadie. So for this episode, it is Pride Month here in Canada and in many other countries around the world. And in honor of Pride Month, we at Keep It Fictional want to celebrate the achievements of 2S LGBTQIA+ authors and creators. Pride Month began with the Stonewall Riots, a series of riots for queer liberation that took place over the course of several days, beginning on June 28, 1969. The riots began after police raided a gay bar in New York City called the Stonewall Inn. Queer and trans women activists are credited with inciting the riots, including Marsha P. Johnson, Sylvia Rivera, and Stormé de Larverie. In the year following the riots, pride marches for 2S LGBTQIA+ rights were held in several cities across the United States. The goal of these marches was said to commemorate the Stonewall riots and further push for queer liberation. These marches ignited the Pride movement across the United States. Despite originating as a protest, Pride today is mostly treated as a celebration, with parades and parties for people of all ages. However, it's important to remember Pride's origins as a protest and a movement for liberation, and to commemorate the brave queer and trans women of color who spearheaded the movement for 2S LGBTQIA+ rights and freedoms. To celebrate Pride Month here at the Port Moody Public Library, we have some wonderful books to share with you all by queer authors and about queer characters and experiences. Many of us already read and talk about queer books here on the podcast, so our backlog is already filled with lots of great recommendations for queer reads, and I'm really excited to see what new books we have to add today. So first, I will actually start. And my book is a young adult graphic novel that's been on my TBR list for a while now, and I used this week's theme as an excuse to finally read it. So the author of this book is a cartoonist and an illustrator who writes kids' books and works on animated TV shows. The author's name is Molly Ostertag, and she's been on my radar for quite a long time. I've actually already read some books by her partner, N.D. Stevenson, who's also an author and an illustrator. He wrote Nimona, one of my favorite comics, and it's a must-read if you like science fiction and queer stories. And he also wrote the Netflix remake of She-Ra and the Princesses of Power, which is a great cartoon if you want something kind of fun and wholesome. So the book I have today is a heartwarming and wholesome queer story about romance, about family, and first loves, and coming into your own, even when all you want to do is hide. So the story takes place in Canada, even though the author's American. The setting is a small island community in the Maritimes in Nova Scotia. So the book has beautiful illustrations and a really sweet and sentimental story. The title is The Girl from the Sea by Molly Ostertag, who did the story and the illustrations. So the book is about a 15-year-old girl named Morgan, and Morgan has a secret. She can't wait to escape the perfect little island where she lives and to live her life how she truly wants to, away from all the people who have known her or who think they have known her for her entire life. Morgan's plan is to go to college in a big city and finally live her life as an out gay woman, something that she hasn't felt comfortable or confident doing in her small town. And on top of trying to understand her own identity, she's also going through troubles at home. Her parents are recently divorced, and her younger brother is acting volatile and aggressive all the time. What Morgan really craves is an escape from her family, from her stifling hometown, and from hiding her true feelings from those who are closest to her. She finds this escape in a mysterious and beautiful girl named Kelty. One night, while sulking on the cliffs outside of her house, Morgan falls into the ocean, and she is saved from drowning by Kelty. When this happens, Morgan assumes that she must be dreaming. Surely a beautiful girl like this wouldn't save her, so this must be a hallucination from having a near-death experience. Since she's convinced that she's dreaming, Morgan is overwhelmed with confidence and leans over and kisses Kelty, her mystery girl. That night, while laying in bed, Morgan remembers meeting Kelty once before. When she was 9, she and her dad and her younger brother were swimming in the ocean below a bridge near their house. and a beautiful girl appeared in the water and took her down to the ocean floor to show her some fish. And when they were deep underwater, that girl turned into a seal. She was underwater for so long that Morgan's father dove in after her. Um, and when he pulled her back up and they came up to the surface, that seal was gone. Back in the present day, Morgan is going about her morning as usual when Kelty suddenly appears outside of her house. Kelty loudly proclaims that she is a Selkie, a seal that can shapeshift into a human, and Morgan's kiss has allowed her to shed her seal skin and walk on land. They can now find their fortunes together as true loves. Morgan obviously does not believe this. Kelty insists that her story is true, and Morgan reluctantly allows her one day to convince her that Kelty is in fact Selkie and that they are in fact true loves. Morgan's mother takes a liking to Kelty almost immediately, but her younger brother is skeptical. In town that day, Morgan tries her hardest to help Kelty blend in, but all attempts at this fail when they run into Morgan's friends, kind of like a popular high school group. The other three girls, and especially Morgan's friend Serena, tease Kelty for her abnormal ways of speaking and her style of dress, and Morgan doesn't defend her. Morgan ends up leaving Kelty to hang out with her other friends. That night, when they meet back up by the sea near Morgan's house, Kelty is about to put back on her sealskin and return to the ocean, and Morgan inexplicably doesn't want her to. Despite truly believing it would be for the best, she wants to keep Kelty around just a little bit longer. The next day, and for many days after, they have a bit of a do-over of that kind of rough first day they had together. They kayak to the rookery where Kelty lives with the seals. They see a bunch of baby seals. They're very cute. They watch movies together. They have many clandestine kisses away from prying eyes. And Morgan spends her summer hanging out with her secret Selkie girlfriend. And although she's never been happier or felt more herself, she's slowly pushing away her mom and her brother and her friends in the process. Tensions grow between Morgan and her family members, and their problems come to a head when her brother sees her and Kelty kissing on the beach, and he proceeds to out her at a family dinner that night. After this incident, Morgan confides in Kelty outside her house, and Kelty actually admits that she's not on land to be Morgan's true love after all. She's on land because she has a mission to fulfill. There's a new cruise ship in their town owned by Morgan's friend Serena's family, who's very, very wealthy. And this cruise ship is going to pass by the rookery on its tour route and poison the water with its gas, with its chemicals, and that poison is going to push all the fish and the seals away, leaving the seals without a home. Kelty's mission is to stop this ship and to save her family, her seal family. Morgan feels betrayed that Kelty lied to her, but she eventually decides to help her love achieve her goal. The two end up attending Serena's birthday party on the cruise ship together, debuting as a couple in the process, and they have to work together to stop the cruise ship and to save the seals. So I really enjoyed this book. I thought it was super cute. As you guys know, I really enjoy graphic novels, so this was something that was very much up my alley. I like graphic novels that are kind of cozy, kind of heartwarming. This one has pretty similar vibes to the Tea Dragon Society, which I've talked about before. It's a similar kind of sweet, sentimental story with a brief, suspenseful conflict, but something that gets resolved in the end. The latter part of the book is mostly dedicated to this party and to rescuing the seals, but the core of the story is about Morgan and Kelty's love for one another, and Morgan growing to accept and love herself for who she really is, as well as Morgan feeling the confidence to share who she is with the people that she cares about without cutting them out or pushing them away. Although coming out stories are not my favorite trope in queer books, this one's really well written and well illustrated. And I appreciated the fact that it was full of really kind of in-depth, flawed characters. Characters like Morgan, I feel, are a good model for queer kids and teens who may not be 100% comfortable or confident in their identities yet. But stories like this can help them better understand themselves and kind of learn to talk about those feelings. Morgan makes a lot of mistakes throughout the book. Like I had said before, she gets outed by her brother, which isn't great. But she kind of is able to grow a bit and work through figuring out how to talk about how she feels and share her identity with other people, as well as accept herself. I did not love the fact that Morgan was outed, but that moment led to character development for both her and her brother. Her brother acknowledged his mistake. He apologized to his sister, understanding that what he did was wrong. which again is a good model for kids and teens because obviously people will make mistakes. Overall, I really liked the book. I thought it was super cute. I read it super fast. So if you're in a reading slump, it's a great thing to get you out of that. It was wholesome. I was really rooting for Kelty and Morgan to resolve their problems that they overcame throughout the story. And the ending is quite bittersweet. It doesn't have that like cheesy, everybody lived happily ever after sort of ending, which I liked. It was a bit more realistic, despite the fact that one of the protagonists was a selkie. So if you like queer comics, queer graphic novels, if you liked Nimona or The Witch Boy, which is Molly Ostertag's comic series for kids, if you like the Tea Dragon Society or the Magic Fish, or if you want a quick kind of wholesome read about sapphics that are in love, then I recommend that you check out The Girl from the Sea by Molly Knox Ostertag. So that was my book, and now we're going to have a pretty dramatic vibe shift. We're going to switch over to Kareen, and she's alluded that her book today is pretty dark, so I'm excited to see what it is.
Sweet. Splendid. Yeah, so I wouldn't necessarily, my book is not dark, but it's very complex and the tone is very different. I love that you did Molly Ostertag's book. I interviewed as part of the Youth Services Committee Interlink author visits, and oh my gosh, she's so cool. She's so cool. Yeah, really, really, really great author and illustrator and D&D player, and who has been on Critical Role. And so I was like, wow, a little bit starstruck. And that book is just so sweet and so wonderful. And and this book, while wonderful, is not that. And I'm going to struggle to talk about it a little bit because, of course, as per my brief for this podcast, I read the book overnight, and so I'm still kind of like grappling with a lot of the themes and the messages of this book. But I can recommend it, so that's nice. Rajiv Mohabir, Mo. Well, I'm going to try that again because I need to get the author's name at least right, and my writing is too bad. All right. Rajiv Mohabir has grown up as an outsider. So in the white Florida community, he stands out as being a brown person in an atmosphere charged with racism, especially post 9/11. He's both Indian and not Indian, not just Indian American, but his family comes from Guyana. He is Guyanese Indian American. His parents immigrated from Guyana, which is part of kind of the Caribbean region. His grandmother has come over to live with the family in Florida, and she only speaks Guyanese Bhojpuri, or a kind of creolized English. They are both Indian, not Indian, and on top of that, they are also mixed caste. And he is also an outsider in his family. He is gay, despite his mother's tears every time they talk. It's a secret that sits in his throat. If his family ever learned about this, he would be a pariah. Another word for pariah in their kind of like a Caribbean slur is an anti-man, someone who is effeminate or homosexual. And it's also used as just a blanket term for being pariah. This is, as described by the author, a hybrid memoir. And if you're wondering about what that means, so am I. It is both a memoir, kind of like a wandering miasma of like family. He is a poet, and so it is interspersed with different poems and songs, different asides, parts where he transcreates his grandmother's songs. And the figure of his grandmother is, I think, one of the most beautiful parts of this memoir. So his grandmother is Aji, and she was married to a very difficult man. Her children converted to Lutheranism and kind of left all of their culture behind in their attempts to assimilate into the white world. They moved away from Guyana. They lost their accent, lost their religion. They even took on new names. Rajiv's father now calls himself Glenn and pretends that he is more white than the white people. The family and the 11 children of Aji disperse throughout the world to Toronto, London, New York, and Florida. And eventually, in her older age, Rajiv's family decides to bring their grandmother away from the home and everything she's ever known to come and live with them in the guise that it will be better, in the guise that she will be happier. But Rajiv, I think, is one of the only people that sees the situation for what it really is. She's a tropical bird in a cage, isolated and taken away from everything she knows. No one around her speaks her language, not even her own children. She is the last speaker in her entire family that speaks this language. And Rajiv wants to connect with her, wants to connect to his ancestors, wants to connect to his own story. And so attempts to learn that language and learn the songs of his grandmother. So if you were like me and really didn't have a concept of this culture and this place, in 1833, slavery was abolished throughout the British Empire. And so all of these British slavers, all of these colonists essentially lost their workforce. The African enslaved people took their little parcels of land and started farming for themselves. And so the British needed cheap labor. And so what they did is they looked around to another one of their colonies and they looked to India, which was currently being racked by famine, by disease, by poverty. And so they sent these recruiters out into small communities, promising a better life, promising opportunities for their children, lying to these people that they would have gold and an easy life far away. So between 1838 and 1917, over 239,000 Indians were taken from their homeland to Guyana in the Caribbean. They were taken under the guise of being servants or indentured servants, but their lives were quite different from what they had been promised. In some journeys, 20 to 30% of the people died on the long journey there. Disease, poor food, lack of fresh water. Their lives were incredibly difficult, but they found solace in songs and storytelling. They weren't exactly slaves under the law, but they were essentially treated that way. And as part of the attempts to kind of assimilate and dominate these people, the British began to systematically try to convert them to Christianity, further severing them from their ancestral religion and their own practices. They were sequestered on their own plantations, unable to kind of form community with others. However, the traditions of the songs and the stories, and especially that of the Ramayana, the grand epic, stayed strong with these particular people. And they started to create their own language specific to this region, specific to this country. It's kind of a dialect of English. It's called kind of like a Creole dialect. And Rajiv's grandmother, again, is a speaker of only this. This is her native tongue that she learned. It's not quite an Indian language. It's not quite English. It's somewhere in between. She speaks in metaphors that he can never understand. She makes references to things that he simply can't grasp without knowing the language well. But he has such a he wants to really reconnect with his identity in that way. And so he, of all the grandchildren, takes a little tape recorder and starts recording his grandmother at family gatherings. He records her songs for funerals, her songs for weddings, her songs when you are gathering the wheat, the songs for harvest. And he does what he calls transcreating them. So taking them from that language and putting them through himself into English. He goes on a journey throughout his life to reclaim his language and songs. He retraces his steps all the way to India to try and reconnect with the language and reconnect with his ancestors. There is a wonderful and frankly amazing section in the book where he goes to a small village to find kind of uh, a singer, a holy person. And as he sings these songs in languages that he knows, he wants to try and see if he wants to try and see if anything of his ancestors survives in that place where they were taken from. And finally, he asks the man, like, "Do you remember any songs that the women sang um, from your village? If you can think far, 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 far back." And the man comes out and sings exactly the same song that his grandmother sang. So separated by 200 years, that song, it sang in that way, still survives. And that kind of thread of song and story connects him to that Indianness that he doesn't always feel. This is, of course, a memoir, and we see him kind of struggle to find his place. He is a poet, he becomes a teacher, he finds love, he finds what he thinks is love, he finds heartbreak, and he is outed to his family against his will in what has to be one of the most emotionally upsetting sections that I have ever read in a book. It's a beautiful, honest, this is going to sound like a weird adjective to pull from. It's kind. Despite all the things that have happened to him, despite all the things that people have done to him, he is kind. He comes out of it as the poet does, trying to find the beauty in everything, even the beauty in his own heartbreak. It always feels weird on this podcast to review a memoir because am I reviewing this person's life? Am I saying, oh, I wish the world had been a little bit kinder to you and kind of had shifted the narrative in that way? I think that I think that this is such a gift that he has given us. It is such a kindness that he has granted us to kind of give us a glimpse into the world of his culture, give us the glimpse and honesty into his life where he's aware he doesn't always make the best choices, but he makes the choices that he has. His struggles as an immigrant, his struggles as the child of immigrants, the struggles of a gay man, the struggles of a brown man, the struggles of a poet, a son, a folklorist. It's a beautiful collage of someone who is really grappling with their multiple identities in a beautiful way. And above all, like this beautiful love that he has for his grandmother and really connects with her of being that outsider even amidst her entire family. She speaks a language they don't understand. He lives a life that they don't understand. And her boundless love for them is beautiful. So, if you are looking to cry, just cry, and also have some poetry, I can very, very, very heartily recommend Antiman, a hybrid memoir by Rajiv Mohabir, which was the winner of the Restless Book Prize for New Immigrant Writing, among others. And I'm definitely going to see if I can track down some of his poetry later.
Thank you so much for that, Corinne. That was definitely a vibe change, but I think that's a really powerful and important story. So I'm glad that you shared it with us. I think we could do our existential question next. So I know a lot of us already read a lot of queer literature. We've already talked about a lot of queer books on the podcast. So I want to ask, what other queer books or authors do you want to recommend today besides just the book that you've shared? So what are your Pride Month honorable mentions? Who wants to go
All
first?
right. So everybody's just like, well, I go first because like these are actually books that I haven't read yet. I considered these to for my episode for today. And I just didn't get a chance to read them. But like one of the ones is a collection of short stories by a queer Indonesian writer. It's called Happy Stories Mostly, and it's by Norman Erickson Pasaribu, and it's translated by Tiffany Sao. And it is a collection. Is said it's asked what it means to be almost happy, to nearly find joy, to sort of be accepted, but to never fully grasp one's desires. And it has short story that include one about an employee who's new to their workplace and they're trying to figure out how things work. And they work in the Department of Heaven that is devoted to archiving unanswered prayers. Another story is about a young student who is trying to get to know this other classmate who's obsessed with trying to figure out the identity of a mythical 100-foot tall man. So it's supposed to be a collection that blends together speculative fiction and also dark absurdism, which you can tell is like completely my combination. So that is a book that I have been trying to get a hold of forever and ever already. Sorry, Emma, I'm just going to mute you because I keep hearing echo. The other one that I have been borrowed a couple of times and just never got around to, and I'm very annoyed at myself, is called Dinner on Monster Island. It's a collection of essays by Tanya Di Rosario. It's about and Rosario grew up and it's about her experience growing up as a queer, brown, and fat girl in Singapore. When she was 12 years old, her mother and a bunch of her church friends decided that Tanya must be like there must be something evil in her because she's dressing up like a boy. So we need to like exorcise all that out of her. So they actually drag her for an exorcism and to try to banish that evil in her. And so she talks about that experience and she also linked it with a lot of horror movies and talk about like the role of women, especially in horror, Carrie, Sadako in the Ring, and try to link that to kind of looking at like how we are portrayed very often, we portray women as monsters and what it means to be different. So those are the two books that I would very, very much like to get my hands on as soon as I can.
All right. I'm going to give my honorable mention to Tilly Waldron. Oh boy. Walden. Thank you so much. I'm going to give my honorable mention to Tilly Walden, who I think is just one of the greatest graphic novelists working right now. I find it very difficult to talk about her books because they're so beautiful. They make me feel so many things, like viscerally on a cellular level, that I really can't like find the words to articulate how beautiful they are. But On a Sunbeam is gorgeous. Spinning is so good. Um, I'm going to give another like backlist bump to a book that I have talked about on this podcast before, but still like haunts me to this day. Secret Life of Church Ladies by Disha. Bill, my writing is really off the wall right now. Bilgin? We did an episode about that. It's a collection of stories by a Black queer writer, and they're just like fantastic. And sometimes I still find myself thinking about them, especially when I have to like shovel snow, because there's a really specific scene in one of the stories where the character is shoveling snow. And every single time I do it, every winter since I've read that book, I think about that short story again. So it has really kind of stuck with me. Again, an author that I read a lot that I love but have never talked about in the podcast, Alexander Chee, who wrote The Queen of the Night, How to Write an Autobiographical Novel, as well as a collection of like he does a lot of essays, who I think is just like an amazing writer and teacher, that maybe one day I will be able to find a book that will fit this and I'll reread Queen of the Night, which was a lot. And I'm really sad. I, for some reason, did not pick up any romance books for this particular topic. And there are some great people working in the field that I should kind of have talked about. Oh, and Boys Run the Riot by K2 Gaku, which I think is just like so wonderful and so good.
Okay, before Sadie go, Emma, since Corinne already broke the rule, you are more than welcome to mention Camilla again, okay? Sorry.
There are no rules. I don't make rules. Anyway, since I've been given permission, I really, really loved Carmilla. I talked about that during our vampires episode. If you are curious about like what I assume is the origins of the predatory lesbian, I would highly, highly recommend it. It was just so fun and wacky. But yeah, shout out to Al for making me read a vampire book because that's usually not in my repertoire. Someone that I've been wanting to read that I thought about reading for this week, but I couldn't because Virginia has talked about her before, is Emily Austen. I have Everyone in This Room Will Someday Be Dead on my TBR, as well as Gay Girl Prayers, which I have to read before it's due at the library like next week. a book that I read recently that I really, really liked. It's kind of subtly queer, so I didn't want to talk about it for today, but I would highly recommend if you like manga, horror manga, kind of subtle queer horror manga. But it was called The Summer Hikaru Died, and I really, really liked it. There's a lot of kind of freaky body horror going on. If you like Junji Ito, you'd probably really enjoy it. Um, One of my all-time favorite books, I don't know if it's been talked about before, but Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe. Stellar. I also really love Last Night at the Telegraph Club. Um, and then the last one is one I would have read today, but I tried reading this person's memoir at the beginning of the week, and it was just like, it was too heavy, it was too dense. I need to dedicate like a month to read it to really engross myself in it. But I've been meaning to read Billy Red Belcour's memoir, who the name History of My Brief Body is the title of it. My sister's obsessed with it. Other people I've spoken about really, really love this, or other people I've spoken to really, really love this author. And he's been on my list for a long time, but when I have the energy, I will finally attack that one.
For my honorable mentions, I think that most of them have been talked about, but they are just kind of my tried and true picks, and I love these authors. Cemetery Boys by Aidan Thomas, Virginia, anything by T.J. Klune, I'm sure you agree with. Juno Dawson, Her Majesty's Royal Coven, as well as a sequel, which I haven't gotten to yet, but I'm very excited to read. Canadian, Tom Ryan, I hope you're listening. And then Melinda Lowe as well. The Last Night at the Telegraph Club, as Emma mentioned. And then I believe that maybe Fiona talked about one of her other books on the podcast as well, that I'm drawing a blank on the name of, but she is a powerhouse and a wonderful, wonderful author. So those are my honorable queer mentions.
Awesome. Good to hear some books that maybe have been talked about before, give an extra boost. Also hear about some new queer authors that we're all either interested in or who we've really loved in the past. So thank you folks for sharing. Let's see. Next we have Virginia. Time to share your pride pick of the week.
All right. So as Emma and all my book friends just pointed out, there's so many wonderful authors to choose from. So I kind of like limit myself to books that are available right now on audiobooks, because that's the format that I'm working with right now. So that is how I found, and I do have the print book today, is Family Meal by Bryan Washington. The audiobook is narrated by Andre Santana, Bryan Washington himself, and also Jake Choi. Bryan Washington is the author of a short story collection called The Lot, and also his first novel is called Memorial, and this is his second novel that came out last year. And it's always a bonus when you found and you read a book that you really like, and then you learn more about the author and you learn that they are cool. They are nice and cool. And so of course, for me, it's not like Corey mentioned earlier, like D&D fan. And for me, it's like, because Bryan Washington is a giant reader. He said that in his interview, he would much rather read than write. But not only that, he also is a lover of Japanese literature, which of course in my books is like the best. And so, like he mentioned a bunch of authors, that he loves. And I'm like, oh, like Bryan Washington loves all these authors also. And he actually lives in Houston and Osaka. He sort of split his time. And when he was asked, like, what is your favorite, like, kind of food from Osaka or from Japan? And he mentioned okonomiyaki. And okonomiyaki is like like a savory pancake that you cook on a grill. And when you go to the restaurant, you actually cook it to get you cook at the table yourself. And I remember doing that with my friends when we were in Japan. And it just, the act of that sort of cooking together just makes everything just taste better. And of course, that's a big theme in this particular novel also. So Family Meal is about Cam and TJ. They both grew up in Houston, but Cam has left to go to LA, and there he met Kai, his boyfriend, his partner. But now he's back in Houston because Kai died. We find out later in the book what happened, but we know it is something unexpected, something quite tragic. And Cam tries to numb himself with alcohol, with drugs, with endless hookups. He's just having sex with everybody and anyone. And it's just his way of dealing, or maybe more accurately, not dealing with the grief and not really knowing what to do with it. It doesn't help that he also sees Kai everywhere. He seems like the ghost of Kai is just talking to Cam, commenting on what he's doing. And so that makes it even harder to let go. He got a job at a bar, and the owners of the bar were nice enough to also offer Cam a place to live. And that is where he bumps into TJ again. TJ and Cam are old friends. And maybe the word friend is not quite enough to describe their relationship. I don't know if there's an actual word, any word that would be enough for that. They go way, way, way back. When Cam's parents died, TJ's family took him in, and TJ's family owned a bakery. And so like his TJ's father Jin is like showing Cam the ropes, like telling him all the secret of how to bake stuff. And TJ is mildly annoyed because he's like, hey, I'm your son here. Like, I'm going to be the one who's taking over your bakery. Why don't you show me instead? But they spend a lot of time together. They as they're growing up as teenagers, they experiment with different things. They share a lot of like first experiences together. But things happened, and they kind of drifted apart. And Cam then moved to LA, and they kind of kept in touch, but not really. TJ knew about Kai, knew about what happened, but it's really awkward for TJ because he doesn't really know also how to approach this. Like he doesn't even mention the word Kai in front of Cam. He's afraid. He doesn't know what to do. And Cam sometimes knows it, and he just wants to dare TJ to just say Kai's name in his face. So it's a complicated kind of relationship. And TJ's trying to get Kai to go see his mother May, because May is just asking all the time ever since she found out that Cam is back in town. TJ has his own thing going on. He's kind of having sex with this guy named Ian, this white guy who is engaged to a woman who is not really sure what he's doing, and is just kind of dragging TJ along, and TJ is kind of okay with it, and it's just things are complicated. And we watch Cam and we watch TJ, like the two really good friends, old friends, who sometimes when you know somebody for too long, it's almost like you forget how to say things. You forget that there are certain things that need to be said out loud. And so we just watched the two of them trying to relearn how to be with one another. And that's kind of the book. It's not a plot book. It's about two people trying to make things work, to people messing up, making poor decisions, and sometimes you try to show that you care, but you don't really know how to do it, or you show it in a way that the other people just don't understand, and it just turns out like badly. And so you just watch the two of them trying to work things out. And people are complex. We're messy beings, and we don't always behave consistently. And Bryan Washington's characters definitely don't. Like, they're not following sort of like an arc that we expect them to follow along. But Cam and TJ and everybody else in this book feel incredibly real. Like, I am sure it takes a lot of like craft and skill to make them seem so natural. But like every single one of them, like, it just feels like real people doing and going through real things. And that's the magic. I think that's the magic of Washington's writing. It is so well done that you don't see like the hours and the hours that has been put into it. Washington himself is a queer Black man, and so his books often deal with characters or have characters that are dealing with that intersectionality. And through that lens, in this book, the characters are dealing with sort of the world that they found themselves in is a post-pandemic kind of recovery world. There's gentrification going on. The bakery, the bar, they're both quite in trouble. There's violence against people of color. There's police brutality, and these characters are just trying to make sense of the world. Family Meal is also very much about the family that we choose to surround ourselves with that can help us deal with all the stuff that is going on. Cam and TJ are the characters that are the main characters, but there are so many other key characters, even if they just show up for a little bit, that are just so well realized, and they're fiercely, fiercely protective of everybody that they love. And you will fall in love with them. And the thing about these particular farm family is that they're not always like all good that is going on. Like, again, people messed up, and it's everything is the whole package that you're getting. So it's not just like this, all like everything is just happy. There's definitely a lot of other things going on that require a little bit of patience, require forgiveness. And of course, a lot of this love for one another is shown through the act of cooking. And it's that care that you can provide when you're cooking for someone. A lot of these characters, they use food as a way to reach out, to break down barriers, to try to show their care in a way that they can understand, in a way that it makes sense to them. And so there's a lot of really, really heartwarming moments in the book of just making and sharing food together. And a lot of times, none of the characters are allowed to leave the house until they have something to eat. Or like this is the way for the family to show that you accept it when you're asked to stay for dinner, that kind of thing. So it's a great book, have like just so many emotions all together. And as I mentioned, I listened to this in audiobook, and Sadie may be able to tell me a bit more whether this is a thing, but I find that when I'm listening to audiobooks, because someone is doing the reading, it's not like a physical book that you can just stop easily. You can't just like put down the book, or just like close it up. And so I find sometimes like I'm like I it's harder for me to like have take some moments to like think about the book. So it's just like because the voice is just keep going. You can't stop it. And so like I find myself like just like listening to this, and then just at the end I was like crying buckets. I didn't like, because just everything, just by the time like the book finishes, it's just like I'm like like I can just like let out all the things that I've been like listening to. So it's a really, really good audiobook. So I highly, highly recommend that too. And I'm sure the book, the reading experience is just as good. A book of compassion, a book that celebrates sort of lives that celebrate joy, heartbreaks, with great, great characters. I'll definitely be checking out more of this author's book. So this is Family Meal by Bryan Washington.
Thank you so much, Virginia. Surprising no one, Virginia has shared a book that's immediately going to go on my holds list. And I have to say, I have the same experience with audiobooks. When I listen to audiobooks, I get so sucked into it that like once I pause the book, all I can think about is that audiobook. Like I have such a hard time separating my headspace from that. But thank you so much for that. I'm absolutely going to check that one out. And now we'll transition over to Sadie. I don't even know if you have an audiobook for us today, but I am excited to hear your thoughts on what you read for Pride Month.
No, I do not actually have an audiobook today, which I would have loved to listen to the audiobook, but I don't know if this has been made into an audiobook. I looked through the library and it was not available. I didn't go to Kobo to check and see if it was an audiobook there, but I would have loved to listen to it, and I would have loved to listen to it narrated by the author, but I don't know if she is into audiobook narration. So I will have to check it out, because I would re-listen to this one. Now I think that it's I've mentioned before that I don't tend to watch a ton of TV, and I don't really read a lot of memoirs. Now, there is a big exception to both of these things, and it is the same exception, and that is Jeopardy. Me and my husband watch Jeopardy every single day. We record the episodes. If we don't have time to watch them, we'll go back and watch them afterwards. We get very, very invested in like the long-running contestants, the Tournament of Champions, the Masters Tournament, et cetera, all of the many tournaments, which there were too many this year, but it is one thing that we do every single day. We watch Jeopardy, we play along, we love it. And the few memoirs that I have read are usually focused around Jeopardy. Now, I don't think it's a secret that the champions of Jeopardy for quite some time tend to fall into the male, cisgendered, white category. This isn't to say that there are not female or BIPOC or queer winners. And in more recent years, we have definitely started to see more diversity in the winners and champions. However, the ones that dominate, the Ken Jennings, the Brad Rutters, the James Holzhauers, they still very much fit into this category. There are some exceptions, though. Matea Roach, for one, who is the most successful Canadian to ever compete on Jeopardy. She's queer and a Canada Reads champion. And then there is also the person whose book I am going to be talking about today, and that is Amy Schneider. I remember when Amy's run first started on Jeopardy in 2021. I loved watching her. I was rooting for her the entire time. She had a 40-game winning streak. She is the second longest running Jeopardy champion in history, only falling behind Ken Jennings. She is the most successful woman to ever compete on Jeopardy, and she is the most successful transgender person to ever compete on Jeopardy. Schneider outlines her time on Jeopardy, her life in Ohio,
her journey to transition in 2017, and so much more in her book, In the Form of a Question: The Joys and Rewards of a Curious Life. Now, Amy was always told that she was smart. In most cases, she was accused of being smart, often with quite a bit of jealousy or disdain. As she got older, this mostly turned into curiosity about how exactly she got so smart and how she could pass that intelligence on to other people. But for Amy, intelligence itself was never the goal. Knowledge was. She was simply curious about life and always had been. And so she's done everything that she can to continue learning about more and more in the world. This type of knowledge, she explains in the book, is honestly what she thinks has made her so successful on Jeopardy. She's not an expert by any means in any category. She just knows a lot of small and often obscure facts about many different things. Now, Corinne mentioned that you find it a bit strange to review a memoir, and I agree with that. I also find it sometimes difficult to describe a memoir, as you don't always have these kind of plot points that you're trying to hit and you're trying to explain so that someone understands what this book is going to be. Amy's book definitely jumps around quite a bit. She talks about her childhood in Ohio in one chapter, and then she jumps forward to talk about how she responded to fame after her Jeopardy run quite well, she thinks, in another. And then she jumps back to high school, and then she jumps forward again to her first marriage, and then back again to when she first met her first wife, Kelly. But after the opening of the book, where she kind of talks about her search for knowledge, Amy moves on pretty quickly to her experience as a trans woman. Now, Amy didn't start to question her gender identity until she was almost 30 years old. And once she did, she realized that she had a lot more to question than just that. The entire story of her life up until that point, as she puts it, had had an extremely unreliable narrator. And so she was left to figure out how her life before connected to her life now. And she found herself quite concerned with the question of whether she had actually known all along that she was trans. And Amy isn't really sure. Looking back, she can see a lot of clues that maybe she had known, relating more to female characters in books and TV shows as a child, hating to wear traditionally male geared clothing, finally finding herself in her confidence while playing the effeminate character Algernon in a production of The Importance of Being Earnest, even when she discovered her love of cross dressing and actually having the thought to herself, wow, wouldn't it just be easier if I was trans and then I could dress like this all the time? However, it wasn't until after her first wife, Kelly, left her in October of 2016 that Amy decided that she never wanted to dress in those god awful boy clothes again, and that she says she finally realized that maybe she was a trans woman. And in those joyful moments of cross dressing, she had just been wearing the clothes that were meant for her all along, because she had always been a woman, even if she didn't necessarily know it. Amy's memoir is very open, very truthful. She does not hold back from talking about a lot of different topics, including her sex life, her ADD, polyamory, her use of drugs, her love of getting sent free stuff that she does not need, did not earn, and will never use just because she is famous. However, she's also very open, talking about her struggles, talking about her body dysphoria, how when she was a child, she searched out knowledge because she knew that that was what the adults in her life wanted. And she was always trying to please them no matter what, because she didn't feel like she was a smart person. She didn't feel like she was a good person in any other way. And so if she could get knowledge, if she could do well in that side of her life, then the people around her would be pleased. She talks a lot about Jeopardy. She talks about the nerves that she felt when she kind of once again, after all these years, decided to apply for Jeopardy again. She had first applied in the early 2000s, and continued to apply kind of every few years, but never got the call to come on. And it wasn't until after she transitioned in 2017 that she realized at that point that after all these efforts and kind of trying to get on the show, her journey was done, because she believed at the time that she would never, ever feel comfortable enough to go on national television as her true self. However, as time went on, she kind of slowly decided that fear wasn't worth it anymore. And Jeopardy had been a dream of hers for decades. She was voted most likely to appear on Jeopardy in her senior high school class. And so the next time the test came up, she knew she had to apply. She talks about the decision of how she was going to apply. She had applied so many times before her transition, and she didn't know if she wanted to create an entirely new profile, and just kind of apply as herself, as the woman that she was, or if she wanted to attach herself to her old profile, to her old email address, to her old name, and as she puts it, essentially tell the world that she was trans. She wasn't sure if she was ready for that. In the end, she decided that that's what she was going to do. She had a history with the show already that she didn't want to lose. And she knew that kind of as soon as she stepped on that stage, if she got that far, she wasn't going to hide herself anymore. So, what was the point in trying to distance herself from that? She talks about how when she finally learned she was going to be on the show, once again, she didn't know how to present herself. She was worried mostly about how her voice was going to sound. She was terrified of the criticism that she was going to receive as an openly trans woman on national television. But then she also talks about how honored she was and at times how extremely unprepared and out of place she feels as she's been kind of put into this role as advocate and representative of the queer community because of her fame, because she's kind of earned this fame around Jeopardy. She's being asked to speak at events. She's being asked to come to award shows, and she doesn't. She's honored and she's happy to be there, but she doesn't always feel like she's the best person. And she recognizes the history of, as you were kind of mentioning, Emma, the history of Stonewall and the history of that was a lot of trans women of color who kind of started that. And she recognizes those women as kind of her. She's just kind of one in a line of so many other really, really strong trans women. What I really enjoyed as well, she talks about the community of Jeopardy and the camaraderie of the contestants and the connections that she's made. I found it really interesting. She mentions that she's excited to be done her run on Jeopardy because then she'll be able to be Ken Jennings' friend. So I'm guessing they don't allow them to be friends with him while they're still competing on Jeopardy. I can understand that. Yeah, I really enjoyed this book. I loved watching her on Jeopardy. I still root for her every time she appears on the Tournament Champions or the Masters Tournament, which she continues to do. She's on this year's Masters Tournament as well. She's always seemed very true to herself on the show. But it was great to be able to read a little bit more about her life and kind of see how she got to where she is. One thing I've always admired about her, and it's just this tiny little thing, but when you see contestants on Jeopardy, they're always dressed very professionally. They'll wear their blazers, they'll wear their sweaters, and she's one of the only contestants I can think of that wears tank tops that like fully displays her arm tattoos. Like she's just so much herself, and I absolutely love that. Yeah, so it was an extremely honest book, which I also really appreciated, even though I didn't always agree with the choices that Amy made. And I would not have probably made the same choice in my life. I do not want to do cocaine all the time. Good for you, Amy. That's a choice that you've made. But I think that the book definitely gives us a really good glimpse into her life at kind of a variety of different stages. I could relate a lot to parts of it because she spent a lot of time in the theater, and also married to someone who studied theater. And so a lot of the parties she talked about, a lot of the shows and the conversations she alludes to just kind of bring me right back to my undergrad, which was somewhat fun. I would say that if you have strong feelings against vulgar language, and as an almost like flippant attitude towards things like drug use, then maybe this isn't going to be the book for you. However, Amy does say that she's working on a book for her younger fans. So maybe if you're interested in learning more about her without those aspects, you can read the one that she puts out for her younger fans. But yeah, I think if you are a fan of Jeopardy, if you're a fan of Amy Schneider, if you enjoy a very open and honest and humorous memoir, if you're an ally and an advocate for queer and trans voices and stories, or if you're just curious to find out how Amy got to be so smart then I would definitely recommend In the Form of a Question, The Joys and Rewards of a Curious Life by Amy Schneider.
Thank you so much, Sadie. I like Jeopardy. I haven't seen Amy's Run because I don't watch it as religiously as you and your partner do. But thank you so much for sharing that. It sounds super fun, super kind of chaotic, but also really interesting. And thank you all for sharing the different books that you brought. I love that we have a good blend of some fiction, some graphic novels, and then like true memoir experiences of queer folks. It's good to have a nice blend of different queer experiences, whether they are fiction or real life. And that is the end of our Pride episode. I appreciate you all sharing your reads and your honorable mentions with us today. And I want to wish our listeners a happy Pride Month, and we'll see you next week.